Hey Cake Chums, and welcome back to the Mr. Baker's Cakes Kitchen. In this week's video I'm going to be showing you how to make one of my woolly hat cakes complete with a super realistic Pom Pom. Now, I first created my woolly hat cakes for a tutorial, I believe it was the year before last, and then I demoed how to make the hat in particular at Cake International 2019. Recently on my social media I asked if anyone would be interested in finding out how to make it in a YouTube video, and the result was overwhelmingly in favour of yes. So over the next 2 weeks, because yes, I've split this into 2 videos, I'm going to be showing you how to bake a hat-shaped Christmas cake, and then next week I will show you how to decorate it to look like a super realistic woolly hat with that all-important pom-pom. So without much further ado, let's get to the video. Now, if you do decide you want to have a go at making my woolly hat cake, but you're not planning on using a traditional fruit Christmas cake for your bake, then by all means you can just bake some regular round cakes and carve them to shape. But because I'm planning on using real traditional fruit cakes for my Christmas cakes this year, I'm going to be baking mine already in that all-important hat shape. The reason for that is because fruit cakes are so dense with fruit that they're almost impossible to carve. Plus the wastage would be shocking. So we're going to be baking our fruit cakes this week, or this year I should say, in these Pyrex bowls. Now you can buy these pretty much everywhere and they don't actually cost very much money. I'd love to be able to tell you what size they are, but I honestly can't remember. That being said, we're actually going to make up an 8-inch batch of fruit cake today, and then we'll see how much mix that gives us. It may well be that we end up with too much for one bowl, in which case I do have another one ready to go, but based on the amount of fruit cakes that I make each year, I don't think I can be too worried about having too much mixture. Now, the recipe we're going to be using today is Delia Smith's traditional Christmas cake recipe, simply because it's the one that I use every single year and have done for many, many years. Regular watchers may remember that I did have a go at Mary Berry's Christmas cake last year during my Fake It or Bake It video, which I'll link up in the corner. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't like it as much as I liked Delia's. So this year I have gone back to Delia Smith's recipe, which you can find online, and I've linked it down in the video description. But it is also available in her book, Delia's Happy Christmas, if you do have that one. Now, I've got all of my ingredients measured out ready to go, so hopefully this should be quite simple and pain-free. But again, if you would like to know the individual amounts of each ingredient, you can check out the recipe down in the video description. So I guess we'd better get started. Now, before you even begin baking your traditional Christmas cake, the first thing you need to do is soak all of your dried fruit in your choice of alcohol. I did that, and in here I have got raisins, currants, sultanas, mixed peel and glacé cherries, and they have been soaking in brandy since yesterday. You don't have to use brandy, you could also use sherry, you could use dark rum. I know some people even use things like whiskey or even coconut liqueur like Malibu. If you'd prefer to do an alcohol-free version of this recipe, you can also soak your fruit in black tea or even orange juice, but it's important to remember that alcohol has a lot of preservative properties, so if you are using black tea or orange juice, then you may find that your Christmas cake won't last quite so long. Once your fruit has been soaked and you're ready to start making your cake, we're going to begin, as we do with most cakes, by creaming together our butter and our sugar. Now, as always, I'm going to be making my Christmas cakes in my stand mixer, and I've attached the flexi paddle for mine. If you fancy getting your hands on one of these, I believe I still have an active discount code over at the Kenwood World website. If you use the code BAKER10, that will get you 10% off, and it's not an affiliate code, I don't make any money on it at all. So into the bowl of the stand mixer, I'm going to pop my butter, and this is softened butter. It has been set at room temperature, and I believe that's 225 grams. I'm going to begin by creaming that slightly just to get it nice and light in colour and super soft and loose. Once you're happy with how your butter is looking, we're going to add in 225 grams of dark, soft brown sugar. And what that's going to do is give us that really nice, rich, molassesy flavour that you do expect from a Christmas cake. So popping that down again, and just running the mixer until those are fully combined. Once your butter and sugar are completely combined and you can't see any more lumps of butter in the bowl at all, we're going to begin to add our eggs. And we're using 4 large eggs today. I'm going to begin by cracking them into a bowl, just in case I drop any shell into the mixture at all. That way it will stop it ending up in the cake. Then I'm going to muddle those together quickly with a fork. And then we can begin to add that to the mixer as we run it on a low speed. Now, just like when you're baking any type of cake, if you do find that the mixture starts to separate slightly, and that it's struggling to emulsify the liquid of the egg with the fat of the butter, you can just add in a spoonful of your flour and that will help bind the mixture back together. It really does help if you keep your eggs and your butter at room temperature for a decent amount of time before you start baking, because generally it's the difference in temperature between the two that can stop that emulsion from forming. Once you've added all of your egg, you can then go in with the rest of your flour, half a teaspoon of salt, quarter of a teaspoon of freshly ground nutmeg, and Delia's recipe actually calls for half a teaspoon of mixed spice, but I'm a bit of a mixed spice addict, so I've doubled mine, and I've got a whole teaspoon of mixed spice. The last of our dry ingredients that we're going to add, which aren't particularly dry, is going to be the zest of a large lemon and a large orange. And then again, we're just going to run the mixer slightly to incorporate all of those ingredients together. Don't forget to give the beater a bit of a scrape with your spatula as well, just to get any ingredients that have got stuck on there off, and make sure they're fully incorporated into the mixture. And then it's time to add one of the ultimate Christmassy flavours to our mixture, a dessert spoon of black treacle. An ingredient so fantastic, I even named my cat after it. Now, black treacle is incredibly sticky, which is why you'll see I'm using it straight out of the tin. I'm not going to put it into a separate bowl because it will end up everywhere. But if you do find it too hard to work with, you can warm it slightly in a bowl of warm water before you try and use it. Again, just like the soft dark brown sugar, that's going to help give it that really deep, rich, molassesy flavour that we want from our Christmas cake. And then into there, we're also going to add in our dried fruit, which, as I mentioned earlier on, has been sat in brandy for about 12 hours now. And to be honest, I would usually leave it even longer. And some roughly chopped almonds, still with the skin on, just literally taking them out of the packet and giving them a quick chop. And then we're going to turn the mixer on one more time and just bring all of this together. And that is essentially our Christmas cake mix made. Unfortunately, now comes the tricky part, because we now have to find a way to line one of these bowls in such a way that we're not going to distort the shape of the cake, but that we're also going to stop that cake sticking during the bake and be able to get it out afterwards. If you've ever tried baking anything in one of these Pyrex dishes before, you will know that they do not like to be released very easily. So, taking one of those bowls in the size that you would like your cake to be, I'm just going to begin by taking some leftover butter and just rubbing it all over the inside of that bowl. Now, I normally would actually use cake release spray to line my cake tins, but I don't know why, I just find that butter gives me better results when it comes to Christmas cake. So that's why I still use butter. And here's a top tip for you, by the way. When you finish using a packet of butter, keep the paper because there's usually enough left on there to just rub over the inside of your bowl or your cake tin and give you just enough to line it. And then what I've done is just taken some grease-proof paper and cut it into long strips that I'm then going to place inside the bowl, crisscrossing at the centre. What I'm hoping will happen is that will stop the paper creasing too much and it won't leave unsightly ridges in the side of my cake. Now don't panic if you can't get the surface of your cake perfect, because of course we can hide a multitude of sins with our marzipan, but we just want to give it as much help as we can before we even put it in the oven. So all in all, I'm laying 4 strips of paper across the bottom of the bowl and allowing them to hang over the edges at the top. And then just to make sure they're firmly in there, I'm going to use another bowl of the same size, just to make sure they are firmly in place. The weight of the cake mix will also help with that too, and our next job, in fact, is to spoon some mix into this bowl. Now, as I say, I'm expecting to have far more mix in here than I actually need, but that's simply because normally when I make these, I make more than one at a time, so I wasn't entirely sure how much I would need. So just giving that final stir with the spoon, just making sure that all that cake mix from the bottom of the bowl has been mixed up in with the rest of the fruit. And then I'm going to start spooning that fruit cake mix into my bowl. I'm going to try and drop it in straight into the centre, again because I want to squash that paper flat and not allow it to fold or crease at all. And I want to fill the bowl about 3/4 of the way full. You shouldn't find that your Christmas cake will rise too much because of course there's no raising agent in there. We've used plain flour and we haven't added any baking powder or bicarbonate of soda. And then once you're feeling like you've got enough mix in your bowl, I'm just going to use a small offset spatula, or of course you can just use the back of a spoon, just to spread that mix nice and flat, making sure it's been firmly pushed into that bowl. Now I've actually gone more than 3/4 of the way full, but I have left myself a bit of a lip around the top, so this should be absolutely fine. And we can see that I still have quite a bit of mixture left, so I'm going to make up another bowl in exactly the same way. Now hopefully you can see there, that's given me one almost full bowl and one bowl that I would say is probably about 2/3 full. So I can either now spend some time trying to even them out, which I think I'm going to do, or of course you could just bake 2 different size cakes, perhaps one to keep as a family and one to gift to another family member that maybe you won't be seeing this Christmas. Okay, and so there we go. Now we have 2 slightly more even bowls of cake mix ready to go into the oven. Now I don't know about you, but I find Christmas cakes incredibly easy to burn, simply because there is so much sugar in there between the sugar, the treacle, and of course the dried fruit that we have added. So one of the best tips I ever learned from Miss Delia Smith herself is to basically encase this now in a bit of a tent that prevents any part of it burning or cooking too quickly while the rest is taking longer to cook. This will be especially true of a deep cake like this, where we really need that heat to penetrate into the centre. So the first thing I'm going to do is take some more of our greaseproof paper and just wrap it around the whole bowl to find out how long I need it to be. Once I've done that, I'm going to fold it in half. And then this will get wrapped around that bowl to almost encase it in kind of like a tent. Now this can be quite tricky because of that awkward shape of the bowl, so do take your time with this. If you've only got one pair of hands, a sneaky top tip that you can try is using a normal stapler to just pop the staple in the top, just to hold that in place while you work on the rest. Obviously though, you do need to be careful about those staples when you're unwrapping the cake later, just to make sure none of them drop into the food itself. You then just need to take some oven-safe string, i.e. string that won't melt, and wrap that around the outside of the bowl, holding that paper in place. Again, it can be quite tricky because of the awkward shape, so don't pull it too tight or it will just ping off the bottom. The last thing you're going to do, and this is straight from Delia's recipe, and I can't take any credit for it at all, but is cut a square of your greaseproof paper, big enough to go over the top of that structure that we've created. Fold it into 4 and cut off the corner to create a hole in the centre about the size of a coin. And then that just gets placed loosely on the top, ready to go in the oven. If, like me, you have a fan oven, I'd highly recommend perhaps just putting another couple of staples in to stop that piece of paper blowing off in the oven. But again, do be very aware of those staples when you're removing the paper so they don't drop down into the cake. But what all of these combined should do is prevent that cake from browning or catching too quickly and allow you to achieve a beautifully even bake. Now, Delia's recipe recommends that you bake her 8-inch Christmas cake in the oven at about 140 degrees fan for anywhere between 4 hours and 4 hours and 45 minutes. Now, of course, we've split that 8-inch mixture into 2 bowls, but those bowls are incredibly deep. So I'm going to turn the oven temperature down slightly to somewhere between about 120 to 130 degrees fan, but I'm still going to aim for that 4-hour bake time. After that 4 hours, I'm then going to do what we call the singing test, which is where we hold the cake up to our ear very carefully and see if we can still hear it bubbling away. I prefer to do that rather than using a skewer, simply because there's so much dried fruit in the cake itself. It can sometimes make you think that the cake isn't yet baked because of the moisture from the fruit, whereas in actual fact the cake is ready. So again, if you hold the cake up to your ear and listen carefully, if you can still hear the wet ingredients in the centre bubbling away, that tells you your cake still isn't cooked. If your hearing isn't fantastic though, don't panic. You can also try doing the touch test, which is where when you push gently on the surface of the cake, if it springs back up again like a sponge, then that's also a good indicator that your cake is ready. But anyway, I'm going to go and pop these in the oven, and then through the magic of editing, I will see you guys in about 4 hours time, hopefully with 2 beautifully baked Christmas cakes. Wish me luck. And as if by magic, here we are, a little bit more than 4 hours later, and we have hopefully got 2 perfectly baked hat-shaped fruit cakes. So as I mentioned just before the break, these went in the oven around about 130 degrees fan, and they were in for the full 4 hours that I mentioned earlier on. Once they were baked, I took them out and put them on a cooling rack in the bowls and just left them to sit for about half an hour or so before we try and take them out, which is what we're going to do now. Okay, so they're still pretty warm, but I feel like I can probably hold them long enough to turn them out. So, what I'm going to do is put a cooling rack on top, and then we will literally tip this over, and hopefully, if I lift this off, our paper strips will have ensured that we have got a shaped fruit cake. Now, fruit cakes are very crumbly when they're still warm, so do be careful with it, don't be bashing it around too much. But hopefully you'll be able to see that we've ended up with a fairly even bake there. We've got the odd little bit of creasing from the paper, but nothing that we shouldn't be able to hide when we cover it with marzipan. So there's one. And there is two. Again, little bit of kind of creasing and stuff from the paper, but I would say all in all, we can chalk that up to being a success. So I'm going to leave these to cool down completely now, and then when they are fully cool, I'm going to use my cake tester to poke holes all over the top, which was originally the bottom, and I'm going to pour a tablespoon of brandy over each one to feed the cake and soak down into those holes. Then I'm going to wrap them up in greaseproof paper to store until I'm ready for the next part, or next week's video, where I'm going to show you how you can turn these cakes into our woolly hats complete with pom-poms. So, if you're not already subscribed to Mr. Baker's Cakes here on YouTube, do make sure you pop down to the bottom right hand side of the screen and hit that big red button, and if you'd like to get a notification of when next week's video goes up, you can also click on that bell icon as well. If you did enjoy this week's video, as always, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up down below, and I'm already looking forward to seeing you all again next week so that we can get decorating these cakes. But in the meantime, as always, thank you so much for joining me here in the Mr. Baker's Cakes kitchen and for watching, and I'll see you next week. Take care, guys.